So I want to thank you all for coming. That's usually what we say at the end, but I really sincerely mean it now that you came to hear this illustrious and distinguished rabbi who I met, wow, it's going back 31 years ago.
You're not that old.
No, not that old, but it's possible, right? I actually had the privilege of spending 20 years at Aish Torah, a small yeshiva in the old city. And I was zocha. I really had a lot of merit to organize and run what they call Jerusalem Fellowships for over 10 years. And I organized Rabbi Motty Berger to speak there. It was a part of Aish. It was one of the divisions of Aish Torah for visiting college students from, well, actually all over the world. And we had thousands every season. And the truth is, Rabbi Berger has been one of the star lecturers on discovery ever since he came to Eretz Yisrael about 33 years ago, and he still is pumping strong. Before that, he came from Baltimore, hails from Baltimore, and he was very much involved with starting and continuing with an organization called Jews For Judaism. And being involved in counter-missionary work, it was one of my called pet peeves. I was very involved with different types of counter-missionary work myself. And I'm glad that I had chosen Aish Torah, and one of the reasons, many, but one of the main reasons was to be able to be in the presence of Rabbi Berger and hearing the questions the students asked. It wasn't always the question I would have thought of coming out of my mouth, but many things run through your head, and you'll see through the shiur, through this lecture, that many of the questions that, well, he'll already answer them, but when you have a lot of college students who are really thinking, deep thinkers, and coming from not such strong a religious background, it solidifies, hearing both the question, knowing that deep inside we have the same questions, and hearing the answers certainly helps solidify our own emunah and knowledge of Torah. So, without any further ado, Rabbi Berger.
Thank you very much, Rabban, and thanks, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so a lot of the classes that we give at Aish Torah, especially for beginners, and the truth is everybody is a bit of a beginner. Nobody's learned everything. And whether we have people from secular backgrounds, other Jewish backgrounds, even Orthodox backgrounds, a lot of the questions. How do you know there's a God? How do you know God gave the Torah? What's the point of it all? But I think that one of the points that I didn't find in explaining Judaism to people was the question of what difference does God make? What difference does it make if there's a God, or whether God gave the Torah? In other words, until we come up with an understanding of why it's important, what difference would it make whether or not there's a God, we're not going to put much energy into the question. Give you an example. How many of you, show of hands, how many of you have heard of black holes, the idea that there are black holes in the universe? How many of you? Never heard that? Oh, okay. Just about everybody heard of black holes in the universe. Another question. How many of you believe there are black holes in the universe? Show of hands. Oh, well, it seems like all the same hands. And now one more question. How many of you are nuclear physicists? Okay, there's always one joke in there. But other than that, so for those of you who are not nuclear physicists, you've heard of black holes, you believe there are black holes. And how much evidence do you have? Reading a couple of articles in Newsweek magazine. Is Newsweek still around? I don't know.
There are also some photos and videos.
Right. Photos, and he has no idea whether it was in the universe or in his backyard. And we really don't know. What we really have is that, why do we believe it? Because while the evidence we have is sketchy, I'm not saying to not believe it. I'm just saying that while the evidence we have is sketchy, the difference it makes in our lives is zero. And therefore, okay, they're black holes. So what were to happen? Ruvain, right? I'm picking on a guy I know. So what were to happen if one day there was a banner headline across the entire front page of the New York Times? Black holes are a mistake. It was actually a picture, but it was a smudge on the Hubble telescope. And there's no such thing. The physicists will go nuts. But you know what you're going to say? Okay, so there are no black holes in the universe. You won't really take a concept seriously and look into it deeply unless you can understand the difference it makes to you. Now, we have a problem with God. I think being a minority religion is very worthwhile. I believe it was said in the name of Sigmund Freud, although Jewish was very secular, and was asked by his friends growing up in Austria, why don't you just convert to Christianity and get rid of the problem? Because remember, before Nazism, people really thought, once you convert to Christianity, then you're home free. Say, they didn't picture that nothing will work. Why did you just convert? And that's it. After all, it's not like you believe in anything. And that he was said to respond, it's worth being a member of a minority, because you always are forced to ask the question, why are we different? See, once you're part of a majority, like, yeah, okay, I don't have to ask it. It's worth being part of a group which is constantly here. Why are you doing things differently? Very interesting idea. Now, up until the coming of Mashiach, Judaism will be a minority religion, somewhat tolerated in some places, less tolerated in others. What is the state religion of the West? Reuven, what is the state religion in the West? Christianity? I disagree. Secularism. In other words, the Christians and the Jews are both tolerated minorities. In fact, they may tolerate the Jews in America more because after the Holocaust, nobody wants to sound like a Nazi. That may be wearing off, but see, we think that tolerance is permanent. It's not. For a little while, that society may be a little more uncomfortable about anti-Semitism than they used to be. My guess is they're getting used to it now. But the state religion of the West is secularism. And therefore, a lot of people, including a lot of Jews, will say, not really the question of how do you know there's a God, why do you think there is, what difference does it make? The answer is, what difference does it make whether God exists? I think that every religion has some basic mottos. I think the most common motto of secularism is, and I'm going to get around, hopefully by the time I finish today, to deal with the fact that it is a statement more false than any other false religion statement. One of the secular mantras are, it doesn't matter what religion you are as long as you're a good person. You familiar with that? How many of you are familiar with that? Yeah, okay, nodding your head.
Very Jewish.
It doesn't matter what religion you are as long as you're a good person. And that tries to create the issue of it's your own personal affair. What difference does it make if there's a God, if you gave a Torah, if there's a particular religion that's true? So I think as a Jew, Jews, we have to ask the question. And perhaps as Torah Jews, we have to ask, what difference does it make? That people have a right to hear why they should spend time and energy finding out if it doesn't make a difference. Good idea? So we're going to have to pretend I have a board here. So I'm not going to write too much on it. I'm going to look at 3 different points. Each one deserves an evening of its own, and we're going to try to cover each one in about 10, 15 minutes. What difference should it make to you? So, Reuven, I always pick good sports, and he is a good sport. Reuven, are you an individual, or are you part of a group?
I mean, I know the answer, so you're going to play along.
Eugene, have you been in my classes?
I have not been, but
Okay, Eugene. Eugene, are you an individual, or are you part of a group?
I'm an individual and part of a group.
Ah, very loquacious. Both. You are both. All right, so you are, and I want to therefore look at the question of what difference should it make to you, Eugene, as an individual human being? What difference should it make to you if there's a God? And as part of, but being part of a group, which group are you a part of, Eugene? Are you part of the Jewish people, or are you part of humanity as a whole?
Can I say both again?
I think so. Very good. He would have done it right away, but see, came out. So let's look, and obviously we have more identities as well, but let's look at three basic identities. We are individuals, radical individuals. What's in it for me? Ooh, that sounds so selfish, except that a wonderful man called Hillel said, "Imei nani li mili," if I'm not for myself, who will be for me? No problem. Start with yourself. So number one point I want to look at is what difference should it make to me as an individual, whether there's a God who created us, or whether I'm a random collection of molecules. What difference does it make to me as a member of the Jewish people? What difference should it make to me? What difference should it make to the Jewish people, whether or not there's a God who gave a Torah? And number three, what difference should it make to humanity as a whole, whether there's a God? What should we start with? We can start as individuals. What difference should it make to you as an individual? I want to hear it. Nice, small enough group. I mean, kick it. What difference should it make to you as a radical individual? Take each one of you, look in the mirror, just you. What difference should it make to you whether or not there is a God who gave a Torah? So the rabbis tell us, Rav Moshe Chaim Luzzatto points out in Siyat Yesharim, other sources, the way the Luzzatto says it, Lo nivra adam ela litaneg al Hashem b'tanug amiti. Man was created for no other purpose but to get the maximum pleasure from the infinite source. That if I want to figure out what my essential inner drive is, it's the drive for pleasure. Let's not make the Western mistake of thinking pleasure equals what is that which is physical. Because in fact, the rabbis point out, not to go through now, that there are 5 different levels of pleasure. There's physical pleasure, there's emotional pleasure, there's the pleasure of doing the right thing, where we're willing to sacrifice physical pleasure and emotional pleasure for the sake of going off to war, and because we need it, the nation, and therefore we do things that are uncomfortable. Pleasure of doing the right thing, wisdom, or power, different ways of seeing, and the highest level is the infinite, connection to the infinite. But every human being is a pleasure seeker. And what I'm really saying is not just that you are generally a pleasure seeker. I'm saying that every decision that you have ever made is based on your drive to get pleasure. And if I'd like to hear maybe just a couple of challenges. Give me an example. Try to give me an example that challenges that. Give me an example of a decision that a person can make other than that would be a decision to get pleasure. Reuven.
Like giving your life to save somebody else's life.
Wow. Are there people that do that?
Bodyguards.
No. Yes or no?
Yes.
Yes. There are people who put their lives on the line to do the right thing. Are there some people who, when given a choice, run away and don't do it?
Yes.
And so on the question of giving your life for a worthy cause, some people do it and some people don't. But they both have this one point in common. The one who does it says, not says, I'm saying the reality of, you may not think about this one. The one who does it says, I would rather, by the way, pleasure, from the word please, that which pleases me better than the alternative. Do I eat the ice cream or do I give it to my child? One does one does it. Which one pleases you more? One person says, I would rather die for the cause than live with the awareness that I wimped out, that I gave in. The other one says, I would rather live with the awareness than die. What they have in common is each one makes the decision of what will please them the most. And I'm not saying that, therefore, it always works out. One person says, I'm going to give up smoking because I've read that it's bad for me. The other one says, I'd rather get the pleasure of smoking and take the chances. But the common denominator is the pleasure drive. Mother Teresa of Calcutta devoted her life to the lepers of India. Adolf Hitler devoted his life to wiping out the Jews of Europe. This is their common denominator. They both did in life that which pleased them the most. You call him evil and her good based on your value system. of what it tells me about who that person was. That he's an evil person and she's good. A super Nazi would reverse it and say, no, he's a much better person. But the common denominator is, that's the place, they are each letting us know who they are based on what pleased them the most in life. Do you hear the idea, Ruben? All right. So the rabbi tells the common, and by the way, why does it make sense if there's a God who created you? It's simple. We're not going to a God class now, but can anybody give me the one word in Hebrew or English that most defines God?
Ein Sof.
Ein Sof, or in English, the word would be infinite.
Yeah,
Absolutely. And Maimonides points out it's just a negative because we can't really get the... But what we mean by God is the infinite source of all that exists that is finite. And, Ruvain, what can you do for an infinite being?
Nothing.
And therefore it's clear that as opposed to a rain god, who in his fight with the wind god says, I'll give you rain if you give me what I need, because he may be 1,000 times more powerful than you, but the rain god is still needy. I mean, even Donald Trump needs you for your vote. I mean, it doesn't matter how much power or money. If you're not infinite, you need people. Sometimes people act as if they don't, but we know they do. I don't get into politics now. But in a world where there are two or more gods, rain god, wind, you give him what he needs and he'll give you what you need. And that's why Aristotle said it's absurd to talk about loving a god. Again, it's a transaction. But suppose what we mean is that there's not multiple finite, there's one infinite supreme being. What can you do for him? Nothing. And I didn't make this up. It's in, Im tzadakta mati, where his friend said to you, if you're righteous, what have you given to God? Vim chatasa matechsav, and if you sin, what is he missing? Crucial. It's not merely different, it's the opposite. It's a world where we are here because of an infinite source who needs nothing, and therefore, olam chesed yiboneh. You can only be here, Reuven, because there's an infinitely giving being. And therefore, according to the Torah, what did Adam and Eve do? Can I keep on picking on you, Reuven? Yeah. Your wife said okay. And therefore, Reuven, what did Adam and Eve do so wonderfully that they deserve being created? Nothing. Once created, they were put in the Garden of Eden. Total bliss, everything's the best place you could possibly... What did they do to deserve the garden? Nothing. Very good, everything makes sense along the way. Right? So, what's in it? I was created to get the most out of life, and Hillel says, don't apologize that you want to get pleasure. If I don't take care of myself, no one else will. I want to get the most pleasure out of life. What do I need most? I want to get the most pleasure out of life. What is the most important tool I need to get pleasure? Where with this, I'm more likely to get pleasure from my decisions. Without this, I'm less likely. What comes to mind, Eugene?
Wisdom?
Close enough. The rabbis talk about emet, truth. You use your wisdom to figure out what is true and what is false. Picture the idea. We all want to get pleasure. Later we'll talk about that called lo lishma. We all want to get pleasure. To get pleasure, you have to find out the truths of life. You use your wisdom to find out what's true and what's false. Why do we have so much, literally billions of dollars a year devoted to medical research? Because we know that with all due respect to the wonderful advances in medicine, the more we know the truth about in medicine, the more likely we'll make the right decisions. And therefore, if I want pleasure, we have to find out the truths of life in order to get pleasure. We got it? And it'll also explain why the thing that makes us most angry is when we find out somebody lied to us. Somebody knowingly lied to us, it gets us angry. Because we intuitively understand that if we were to follow a falsehood as if it was true, it would be bad for us. Even as, I'm not going to ask any personal questions, even as we probably all know about times in life that we lied, we know how angry we get when somebody lies to us. You making sense? Do you have that idea? All right. So what difference does God make to me as an individual? I don't have to know if there's a God. First, I know I want to get the most pleasure out of my existence. But to do that, I have to find out what are the truths that revolve around my existence. And therefore, I have to find, when it said at age 3, he started asking questions, right? Started asking, what was he looking for? Was he looking for God? No, he's saying, I know this stuff is wrong. They're making mistakes. I got to find out what's true. By the way, Eugene, does it make sense to you that at age 3, a 3-year-old can ask such a good question?
My 3-year-old.
What?
A very bright 3-year-old.
Oh, a Jewish little 3-year-old, I got you. So I want to tell you this nice, cute little story. My mom, Aleh Shalom, told me that when she was pregnant with me, summer of 1949, she was talking to a neighbor outside in front of the house. My sister and brother, Sammy and Judy, were 2 houses down, and while she was talking to her friend, Sammy and Judy, age 7 and 4, were like looking back, didn't know it. All of a sudden, Sammy yelled out, "Hey, Mommy, is that a baby in your stomach?" That was 1949, so talking about that in public was seen slightly obscene. Old time. So my mom says, "Shh, come, come close." And at that point, I guess I was awake. I was moving around in there. So my mom showed, Sammy and Judy how, what we're going. Yeah, there's a baby there. Okay, Sammy, 7-year-old boy. Okay, he got it. He tricycled away. And my mom says, Judy was standing there just looking very betracht, very in thought. And my mom said, she asked, Judy, what are you so betracht? What are you thinking about? And Judy looked up, age 4, and says, but the problem is, how did it get in there in the first place? So you see, a 4-year-old can ask good questions. Bright 4-year-old, right? 3-year-old. So Abraham was not looking for God. He was saying, it's not true. I got to find out what's true. And if not for the Bible telling us, if not for the Novi, in Malachim, and if not for Malachim tells us, probably I wouldn't have the nerve to say. But remember when Eliyahu was fighting the prophets of Baal at Mount Carmel, when he called it, he said, Ad Mosai atem poschim al shtei hasifim. How long will you hop on both sides of the fence? Im Hashem Elokim luchal charov. Bim Abal luchal charov. If God is God, if Hashem is God, follow Him. If Baal is God, follow Him. We wouldn't have but He said it. I know we can. Find out what's true. They can't both be true. People ask me, well, just because you know Judaism, have you look at other religion? Guess what? Once you've determined that 2 + 2 is 4, somebody says, wait, I know it's not 5, but maybe it's 726. No. Again, you can know that if 2 + 2 is 4, you can know about all the other ones that disagree, are mistaken. You really can know that. And so on the basic question, what's in it for me? I want to get the most pleasure out of life. To get it, you better find out what's true. And I think we can understand when we say, I know somebody converted to Christianity, I know somebody he dropped being a Torah. Great. The question, not great, let me change that. I'm sorry, but each person is going to be held accountable. I created you to get the most out of life. To get it, you have to find out the truths of life. How much energy did you put in it? So, for example, when I teach at Aish Torah, a lot of people say, I'm an atheist, I don't believe in God. And so what I say to very often, sometimes what I'd say is, wow, in others, you've gone through the 7 basic classical arguments to prove that there's a God and have disproved them all. I'd love to hear how you did it. I don't. And his answer generally is, huh? So let's be real. Understand. I'm not telling you to be a Jew because God needs your membership. After all, God is infinite. What can you do for an infinite being? Nothing. The issue is you. If you want to get the pleasure of life, you better find out what's true. Now, in another class I would go through a lot more to touch on, to go through the three problems. That in the world, Eugene, does this make sense? That if you want pleasure, you have to find out the truths of life?
Would it be, I would ask why, if God creates something for having pleasure, the road to knowing the truth and understanding what is best to do and how to get it is so complicated and
Why is it so complicated? I guess it does. You have to understand that Judaism say it's not nearly as complicated as it could be, because what is really complicated is the most essential elements of what am I doing here? What am I doing here? But the issue of complicated, I got good news for you. Regardless of what is true, what really is true, life is going to be complicated. I just got to tell you, Eugene, I once met a man, I'll try to cut this short, but I like stories, and I met a man when he was 80 years old. He was involved, he's a very secular Jew in Baltimore, and he was involved, without going into details, he was very helpful to the Orthodox community in an inner conflict between the Orthodox world and the secular world in Baltimore. And I was asked to speak to him. I thought he was on the other side. He said, what can I do to help? And he basically said, look, I know that the only thing that'll be left in the Torah, in the Jewish world, is the Orthodox community. I don't want the Jewish world to do anything in Baltimore, do anything that would cut themselves off from that. I said, look, personally, I believe that, but I don't know many non-Orthodox who believe it. He said, yeah, I was wondering about it, because he was a very brilliant lawyer. And I came to realize why that's so. You see, my friends just don't believe it when I say it, but I know they have children, and they just can't face the fact that they're making a mistake and it'll make a difference in the Jewishness of the family. My wife and I never had kids. I can be more honest about it, about what will work and what won't, because it's not my kids. But I suppose if I had kids, I wouldn't allow myself to see it either. So he asked me, Eugene, he said, if when I die it turns out there is a God, I'm going to ask him, why did it have to be so complicated? I hear. It's another topic. My guess is that in anything that you consider significant in life, you know life is not simple. And invest yourself in the complexity. Do you have kids, Eugene?
I've got 4 kids.
4 kids, that's enough to know. Life is complex. Okay. But it's a good question to start from. All right, so what difference does God make as an individual? I'd say if we were created to get pleasure, we have to find out what's true. Don't start by saying, there's a God. Start by saying, there is nothing more important than to find out and understand that the consequences are going to affect you most severely, making a mistake. Not to go into now, I said that there are basically 3 issues that get in the way of your finding truth. It deserves much more time, but in its simplest form. Eugene, how old are you?
42.
42. Are you a child or an adult?
I'm an adult.
So I'm here to differ with him. I would say that Eugene is both an adult and a child. In fact, he's more of a child. Because after all, you're 42. 42 years ago, you came into this world as an adult. Excuse me. You came into this world as a child. You know how important first impressions are? Well, that's your impression of life. You came into this world as a child, as a short-term thinker. But at 13, you became?
An adult.
Do you believe that? No. See, now then he blames rabbis for that. No. You didn't, at 13, you didn't become an adult. At 13, God activated an adult Eugene. But the child Eugene, who had been there for 13 years, refused to leave. The adult was activated, the child refused to leave, and from 13 till now, you've been Eugene and Eugene Incorporated. But in fact, you're a 42-year-old child fighting for control with a 29-year-old adult. Does that make a little more sense? Talk about complications, Eugene? And therefore, problem number 1 is that while as adults we do want truth, but we are all more child than we are adult. And the child says, if it tastes good, I don't care what the fact that it may hurt me in 10 minutes or 10 years. The search for truth is the adult, in which that is the minor figure in Reuven and Reuven Incorporated. I would also say, Eugene, I as a Torah Jew, I really think we learn so much from modern science. Eugene, are you an animal or a human being?
Both.
We are both. But which are you more? Well, the Torah says, "Umotar adam mina behema oin." The difference between a human being and an animal is just about zero. So I don't have to go to Mr. Darwin to confirm. The Bible tells us way before him that we are massively more animal than we are human, that our eating and our drinking and our sleeping and our et ceteras are all more natural to us than our human thing of saying no, of overcoming, of disciplines, of caring. That we are both animal and human being, but the animal within us is natural. Human being takes hard work. And only the human being cares about truth. And number 3, we are both individuals and part of a group, as I mentioned on my board. But we are 99% the result of our group. And therefore, we are as individuals, we want truth, but we easily will sell out if the world around us will pat us on the back. I can be the most liberal German in the 1920s, but when the world gives me more honor for turning the Jew over to the Gestapo, it's shocking, or maybe not as shocking should be, as to how many people will switch on a dime because of the honor of his group to do the wrong thing. So when we ask, if I want pleasure and I need truth, why did? Because we are in 3 basic areas. Pleasure is natural for us, but truth is not. You have to really overcome your childishness, your animalness, and your abdication to the group around you to find out what's true. But that's one element. What difference does God make to me as an individual? If I want pleasure, I better find out what's true. Let's go to the other extreme before we get to the Jewish one in the middle. Let's go to the other. Me, not as a Jew, but me as a member of humanity. I'm one of 7 billion. What difference should it make to humanity whether or not there's a God who gave a Torah to the Jews? Any input here? What difference should it make to me as one of the 7 billion members of humanity whether God gave the Torah to the Jews? On this, we're going to have to look at, put it back on our board here, morality. Can you be moral without God? I'm going to ask, and remember, you're not going to be on the film here, so you can do this anonymously. Relatively. How many people believe here that you cannot be moral without God?
There's more secular.
Yes.
Subjective.
And then, how many people would say you can be moral without God? I'm afraid we won't have many for the third one that I agree with. And how many people would say the question is totally irrelevant? Because, let's picture, a moral system is a system for evaluating behavior as good or evil. When religious people would say you can't be moral without God, I would beg to differ. The problem is not that without God there's no morality. The problem is that without God there are infinite moralities.
Oh, right. The one thing that...
So, and therefore, see, the problem, first name, man, sir? Amir. Picture this idea, Amir, I think what you're saying. Look at all human civilizations, present or past. You will find that every one of them has a moral code. No, not only there's no one standard, without exception, there will not be a human civilization without a moral code saying this is good and this is evil. The Nazis, they had a moral code, obviously say they were immoral, because they differed with yours. But every civilization has a moral code. The problem is not that without God there's no morality, it's that there are infinite moralities. That is to say, every civilization has a code for determining what is good and what is evil, but there is no agreement within humanity on what is good and what is evil. And therefore, every civilization has a moral code, but they don't agree on the particulars of what is good and what is evil. Now, that creates a situation where the average person says, well, in that case, all morality is relative. It's not really. But I would say, I think they're making a mistake.
Relativism.
I'm saying, what is morality relative to? Is there any possibility where every civilization can agree that with the state, with what makes something moral? And I'm saying yes. I'm saying the Jews and the Nazis, just as a good example of two extremes. Judaism and Nazism, with its huge differences, can agree with the following statement, and that is, what makes some, remember, a moral code is a code that determines whether any particular behavior is good or evil, right or wrong, acceptable or unacceptable. And I think there is a human agreement, and that is, when we look at all of human civilization, we can find that there is an agreement, and that is that what is moral, that is to say, what determines what is good and what is evil, depends on what is blank. Well, I wasn't going to be that easy on you.
What is acceptable?
What is good and what is evil depends on what is acceptable. No. There's something more solid. The Jews, the Nazis, the Christians, the Muslims, the atheists, every civilization will agree what makes something good or evil depends on what is blank.
Truth.
Depends on what is true. That is the reality within human civilization. That as, one minute, no. That if before we said that what makes something pleasurable depends on what makes more pleasure depends on what is true, you don't think of pleasure and morality on the same side. But in fact, the human agreement is that what makes something good or evil depends on what is true. Give me an example. Eugene. Killing people, is that good or evil?
Depends on the circumstances.
Very good. You can't say killing is good or evil. It depends on the circumstances. At which point Adolf Hitler comes and gives you a nice pat on the back. Yeah, me too. In other words, Adolf Hitler and Eugene Kantrovich will agree that sometimes killing is good and sometimes killing is evil. And even Barack Obama agrees with that. In other words, the differences within humanity are not on any particular act, but what is the circumstance in which it's right or wrong. Picture. You give Mr. Hitler all the time he needs to expound on you what he believes is the truths of life. Who are the Jews, who are the Aryans, and he finishes telling you what he believes are the truths of life. I can guarantee you that when he finishes talking, you'll be able to say, Mr. Hitler, if what you just said is true, you are a good man and you did the right thing. Well, are you about to join the Nazis? No. Because I'm saying what you call true is really false, and therefore what you call good is evil. But in fact, do you know what morality is relative to? It's relative to what you believe is true. That in all cases, whether the Jews or the Nazis, whether the Palestinians or the Israelis, what makes somebody right? You said, how could they believe that? Why are you being so silly? Find out if what he's saying is based on what he believes to be true. You can surrender to him if you want. You can fight him to the death if you want. But don't be idiotic to ask him why is he doing it. He really believes that is true. He may allow a certain amount of lies along the way just to help him in publicity for the rest of the world. But if he's putting himself on the line, if he's willing to risk his life and the life of his kids because of what he believes to be true. And therefore we have something very strange. If you want, as an individual, get the most pleasure out of life, you have to find out what's true. What difference does God make to humanity? If you want to figure out what makes something good or what makes something evil, it depends on what is true. Somebody will come and say, oh, but the Torah says we are slaves and thing and two wives. Hey, guess what? All you're saying is that I'm emotionally unready to accept that. So good, so talk to your psychiatrist. I'm not interested in your emotional discomfort about it. I have to find out what is true. And in fact, no country can survive unless it can answer the following two questions. What are the principles that you are willing to kill for? And what are the principles you're willing to die for? Yes, first name?
Moshe.
Moshe, you wanted to ask a question?
Well, no, so the thing is that when I said what's acceptable, the government, the controlling party, is what determines that.
Yeah, whether you park on this side of the street Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I'm talking morality,
No,
not...
but even morality. So the controlling of the government, like you give the example by Hitler, since he was in control, he defined the morality for the people, right?
Again, no, you have to see whether you agree with it. You can kowtow to him or fight him or die for it. That's not... He has government. Government has nothing to do with morality. You don't have to live in Israel to know that. Government has nothing to do with right or wrong. It has to do with, in order to not kill each other, how are we going to make the rules? That's it. That has nothing to do with morality. They may be moral, they may be immoral. The issue is that we want to have a system which determines how we will accept what is the law and not kill each other on a regular basis. That's
So
why.
that's why I was looking for the Pirkei Avot where it says to
Pray for the welfare of the government?
Right.
Very good. In other words, what Torah is saying is, in a tough world, even a lot of anti-Semitism can often be worth it in order that it won't kill each other regularly. Clearly, we have in Jewish history, Pirkei Avot, the Romans were not nice people. What he's saying is, I know it's not nice, but can't imagine what it's like with total anarchy. I think that's what they're saying. And therefore, pray for the welfare of the government because, yeah, it really stinks, but
They're defining what's happening to the people.
No. They're not. They are simply defining who has power. It has nothing to do with right or wrong. I'm saying you have to come up with an understanding, and then what kind of world do you want?
On an individual basis.
Or, as Jews, to explain why does Judaism think that this is good and this is evil? Oh, very good. There's a reality, God, Torah, etc., dealing with, based on that information, it makes perfect sense that that's good and that's evil. We say, but I don't like that, of course, because you don't accept some of the things we say are true. So then, if what we're saying is false, then of course we should be doing it differently. But let's go back to it. You're not really saying that even if everything in Torah is true, it should be like that. You're talking about, you differ on what is true. Great, I understand, that's where our difference lies. But the common denominator, can you hear the idea? When people say that without God there's no morality, it's worse than that. Without God there are infinite moralities. In any area, you as an individual or you as a group, what you understand to be moral or immoral will depend on what you understand to be true or false. In other words, nowadays a kid can come and say, look, I don't have to believe in God to be nice to people. I wouldn't kill people for fun. But he's not facing the fact that 2,000 years ago, if he was in the Roman Empire and he was secular, he'd go to the Colosseum and watch people have fun and by killing each other. What was the name of the great philosopher who spoke out against it in Rome? The rest of them are correct. Nobody. You understand? Hey, what happened?
Well, they were Greek though. But
No, because, right, and they were way before that, right? In other words, no, Aristotle talked about the fact that when you have hunger, so you leave the babies out to die rather than we should die. Again, everybody, it makes sense based on what they know, and that's why finding out what's true is so important. Now, this doesn't prove that there's a God who gave a Torah. It's telling you, though, that what the world becomes depends on what humanity understands to be true. And therefore, be very careful. We haven't yet got into the proof that there's a God who gives it, but you had better understand that there is no natural morality in a world where everybody, if there's any agreement, it's that sometimes it's okay to kill. And sometimes I should tell my children to be willing to die. Yeah, it doesn't get any worse. There is no natural morality. We don't hurt people. If I can give you a little example. A few years ago, I remember because the year 2014 came up there, a young man who was studying to be a Reform rabbi came to Aish Torah. He came to question and answer. The Talmud says you learn more from questions of your students, and I know, really, it's no question. And he said, very nice guy, name was Matt, very nice fellow. And we kept in touch a bit. But he said, Rabbi, can you please explain what you Orthodox Jews have against gay marriage? Aaron, feel free to cut it out. We'll film it. But I'll tell you, you can do what you want, right? What do you have against gay marriage? And at that point I said, I don't know what I would have said had I been able to think about it, but I couldn't. So I'm telling you, I love teaching at Aish Torah because it's clear to me, people think I'm pretty smart. Really, it's not that. It's that when a young person asks me a question, God gives me an understanding. Where even though he wouldn't have given it to me because I don't deserve it, but he deserves it, so he has to give it to me to give it to him. And that's one of my interpretations of that you learn more from your students. So for yourself, you just learn on your own. But for the people who have to hear it, for that alone, God may help you get something that he has to hear. So I said, no, I can't explain why not. Ultimately, this week's parsha, the Anshe Kodesh Tioli, when it says, you should be holy people, don't eat dead animals in the field. Not because it's not healthy for you, it's because I'm trying to take a high level of the animal kingdom called Homo sapiens and turn you into human beings, beings that can connect to the infinite creator. And I'm telling you, we're not talking about scientific reality, we're talking about how to create a different human being. And if in fact the two basic drives human beings have is food and sex, don't be surprised that the two biggest areas of discipline is limiting your food choices and limiting your sex choices. That is, holiness has to do with not doing things because it's part of the animal kingdom, you're going to enjoy it. There's something more than that. That's what a human being is. But I didn't talk to him about that. He said, what do you have against gay marriage? I said, I'll tell you why I can't explain it. Here we are in the year 2014, and you're asking me what I have against gay marriage. Let's go back 100 years. It's the year 1914, and we're in America, and you're a Reform rabbi, and I'm an Orthodox rabbi. And I say to Matt, you don't believe that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. Torah is Jewish people who, that's the way they thought about God. We can change things. We can respect what they thought, but we can change it. So you believe the Torah is not God-given. Here we are in 1914. What would prevent you, if you don't believe God gave the Torah, what would prevent you from doing a marriage between a man and another man for the purposes of them having sex? Now, what would you say in 1914? Would you say, why shouldn't I? Or would you say, Rabbi, that is the sickest thing I ever heard, and I can't believe that just because I'm Reformed that we would ever do such a thing? What would be your answer? And with 15 other guys shifting their gaze from me back to him, he said, yeah, probably that second answer, that because 1914 I would think, yeah, you don't do things like that. Okay, Matt, so that's why I can't explain it to you, because there's no you there. That you are going to give me the answer of whatever you think it's you, but it's not. In 1914, you would say that. In 2014, you say that, and you really think they're both you, not realizing that your answer is massively whatever the world around you feel comfortable hearing from you. By the way, parenthetically, I would say that's the major reason that an Orthodox rabbi cannot really debate issues of Judaism with a Reform rabbi. You can try it as entertainment, but you can't, because the Orthodox rabbi is stuck with reality. It's all the Reform rabbi said, like, what do people want to hear this time? And it depends, 1914, 2014, 2086. They said, I can tell you, ask you a different question. And that is, here we are in the year 2014. If you don't believe that God gave the Torah, what would prevent you from doing a marriage between a man and a dog for the purposes of having sex? Of course you're going to say it's ridiculous.
That's out of the question.
Out of the question. But I can know that if X number of years from now people are doing it, bar mitzvahs aren't the only thing that you'll be doing. I remember somebody saying, wait, but there's a difference, because two men can have consent while an animal cannot. I read it in their material. Oh, don't compare the two. You can't have the consent of an animal. But just to show how superficial the statement is, I asked the guy who said it, are you a vegetarian? No. Oh, well, then you weren't negotiating over that steak. You killed the animal, roasted it, and ate it. So you're telling me that for eating a steak, you can kill the animal, but somehow for having sex with it, you need consent? Come on, let's be real. It's a superficial nonsense. It's like Immanuel Kant saying you don't need God. The categorical imperative will teach everybody that if you don't want to do it to them to you, so you can't do it to them. Oh, the brilliant German thinker. The Germans were really impressed with that 200 years later, right? No, it's superficial nonsense. It's the golden rule. Do unto others what you would want others to do to you. Or don't do unto others what you would not want others to do unto you. But more likely, the golden rule is he who has the gold makes the rules, and that's basically it. Or as one person told me, do unto others before others do unto you, right? I mean, but the basic point is, if there is no God, now I think the most absurd religion is atheism. We say nothing comes from nothing except for everything that comes from fine. Again, in Jewish terms, it's the only way to escape personal human responsibility. But to understand that if there is no God, and everything that exists is equally meaningless, dog, cat, cow, chicken, turkey, human being, and that the reason you kill the animal is because the turkey clearly, I can prove the cow would rather live than die, but you don't like tofu, so it dies. It's the same thing. There's no reason why it wouldn't work for any human being. Once you've determined that there is no significance to anything that exists more than its very non-existence, you can make any rules you want, like no parking on this side of the street Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, but it has no moral backing. It's nothing more than to take care of, well, I won't kill him, so he shouldn't kill me, but that doesn't make a right or wrong. And if you change it, I'd said to Matt, you're really explaining to me why in the 1920s Germany was the most accepting place in Europe for the Jews. It was the most liberal, open society that you Jewish people have ever had, the 1920s. And by the 1930s, they're most viciously anti-Semitic. And it makes perfect sense. People ask, psychologically, how could people have changed from being ultra-liberals to fascists? The answer is they didn't. They didn't go from ultra-liberal to fascist. They were always asking one same question. What should I do now for people to say I'm okay? That's it. They didn't notice it, but we know. In the 1920s, the question is, what do I have to do to be a good German? In the 1930s, what do I have to do to be different, to be a good German? And the question was the same. The answer was very different. But I can know this, that in a world where all morality depends on what is true, this we can know, that if in fact the Indians are wonderful people, but they said that based on what we believe to be true, then when an important man dies, we burn his living wife on his funeral pyre, because she obviously is so horrified to even stay in life. I mean, she may not say so, but deep down I'm sure. And what's it called? Seti? What it's called? And so they burnt the wife on the funeral pyre. And I can guarantee you that Indians are no less intelligent than any other group. Chochma bagoyim ta'amin. Every group of people has the same range of wisdom, from real smart right down to dumb as rock. Some of my students say, but aren't Jews known to be smarter than Gentiles? No, the Talmud says no. It's really a secular conceit the Jews are smarter. See, because we say, well, how is it the Jews have lasted through history no matter what happened and others didn't? Oh, no, it wasn't God. We're just smarter than Goyim. They start out as liberals and they end up as fascists when you think about it. But Torah says, no, there is no difference. Jews are as capable of stupidity as anyone else. And I tell my students, how long have you been in Israel? 2 months? I'm sure 2 months in Israel is long enough to know that, correct, Jews are not smarter than Gentiles. You don't have to be here very long to get that one down. It's just that secular, how else are we going to explain that usually civilizations make a certain amount of mistakes where at a certain point it causes their collapse. The Jews, we keep on going, that's because we're not capable of mistakes, is God cannot allow the disappearance of the Jews because of the Torah we have. Which is why those who drop Torah disappear from the Jewish people, but Jewish people continue. But very important to understand. Let's take Judaism and Nazism as two systems. All systems make sense based on what they believe to be true. According to Judaism, the two essential principles that make Judaism sensible, intelligent, is number one, that there's an infinite supreme being, and number two, he transmitted information called Torah. That is the basic point that Judaism starts on. Infinite creator, and he transmitted Torah. Nazism. We are all a random collection of molecules. If there's a creator, it's simply the creator of nature. We are part of the animal kingdom, and it's only the arrogance of the Jews that said we should overcome nature. And in order for the human race to continue, the strong has to crush the weak. Whether it's social Darwinism, evolutionary Darwinism. Okay, so Judaism makes perfect sense if there's a God who gave a Torah, but Nazism makes perfect sense if there is no God. Again, tell me, if there is no God, can anybody explain what makes it wrong to turn human beings into soap? Of course not. It's just your old beliefs, your old systems of the way you used to think people were important. But we know it's wrong. Be willing to change your mistakes based on mistaken views of what you thought was true. Judaism makes perfect sense if there is a God who gave a Torah. Nazism makes perfect sense if we take their beliefs, essential principles, seriously. No God, and we're all part of the animal kingdom? It's certainly closer to the truth than Judaism if there is no God. Now, does that mean there is a God? Of course not. Maybe yes, maybe no. But you had better understand the consequences to humanity as a whole and the Jewish people in particular about what are the truths. What difference does God make to the human concept of morality when it always depends on what we believe to be true? And the third element, this should be the shortest, and we'll go to questions, discussion. So what difference does it make to me as an individual if there's a God? If I want pleasure, I better find out what's true. What difference should it make to humanity as a whole? If I want to have a moral system that makes sense, we better find out what's true. And then again, that was why Judaism insists that we are here to make a difference to humanity. Don't tell them what to do. You're not allowed to tell people what to do, or you'll end up rivers of blood following us like it follows the Christians and the Muslims, who in a very nice way, they wanted the world to become a better place. And as a result, by trying to tell people how to change their evil ways, you end up with bloody mess. We are also a missionary religion. I don't want you to think we're not. Torah says that by living Torah, the world changes better, in a better way, and by dropping it, it changes in a worse. But we are here to make a difference. And the ultimate goal is the Messianic age, where humanity comes to us and says, we know you're right, teach us Torah, let us live those principles as well. The Jews will live the totality of Torah, called the kingdom of priests, and the segment for humanity's ability to connect to God will be learned by the rest of humanity as well. And as many rabbis point out, Christianity and Islam are part of that process of without us being missionaries, that the pagans around us become more accepting of the concept of a Jewish God and giving the Torah. What about the third element? As an individual, I want pleasure, need to find out what's true. As humanity, we want what moral system makes sense, got to find out what's true. What about as a Jew? As a Jew, can a person be a Jew if he doesn't believe in God? Yes. What about if a person says, a Jew says, I believe in God, but I don't believe he gave a Torah? Can he be a Jew? Yes.
No, but how can you be a Jew if you don't believe in God? Because what makes you so sure that you're a Jew?
No. You're getting too close to the answer. Just a little slower answer. Okay. What's your name? Chana. When it comes to being a Jew, if even the most orthodox, ultra-orthodox Jew says that a Jew who doesn't believe in God is still a Jew. So it would seem that while as an individual I got to find out if there's a God, and as a humanity we have to find out, but as a Jew, it seems that whether you believe in God or not, it doesn't matter. Because even the Orthodox say you're still Jewish. So what's the difference as a Jew, whether I believe in God or not? I think it was just recently, I think it was Yair Lapid who said he believes in God. But his father or grandfather, I forget what came up, he was an atheist, and he was just as good a Jew as him. In other words, if in fact, halachically, whether you believe in God or not, you're a Jew, then what difference does it make? So what I would say is, the difference is, what is your definition of a Jew? And when we look at that, we'll be able to see its application historically. So suppose a person says, A, I don't believe in God. Or B, I believe in God, but I don't believe that God gave the Torah to the Jewish people. So now I ask the question, good, so according to you, what is a Jew? What are the Jewish people? And I would posit the following, I'm willing to hear an argument, if you don't believe in God, or if you don't believe God gave the Torah to the Jewish people, the Jewish people, according to you, are a group of Gentiles who mistakenly thought God gave them a Torah. Now, how many of us are supposed to suffer and die to preserve that falsehood? You're telling me that we are Gentiles. We are a group of Gentiles. And you know what makes us Jewish? Some Gentiles made a mistake believing that God gave them a Torah. What are you trying to preserve? The mistakes of your ancestors? Do you begin to understand why after a few generations of believing that, they intermarry or disappear, or in this country, really have a less and less of a connection to what are they paying a price for here? You see, we really think that we can make it here because we have nukes, tanks, and planes, and the other side has much less. I'm afraid the other side has something very powerful, and that is the deep belief that they are right. And I think that what's really going on is the Jewish people do not have that same deep belief that they are right. And that's usually more important than nukes, tanks, and planes. It certainly determined the outcome in Vietnam, when America thought they couldn't lose. We Westerners like counting material things. These many bombers, these many tanks. I would posit the following. First, let's look at it, Jewry in general. To the Jew who says, A, I don't believe in God, or B, I don't believe God gave the Torah. Oh, but I am proud of what? I am proud of Jewish culture. The Torah? You are proud of the mistakes that the Jews made that made them Jewish. But if God didn't give the Torah, or there is no God, Judaism is the mistakes of a group of goyim who thought those things were true. What are you dying to preserve? The mistakes of your ancestors. Isn't that silly? The real question is not, why is it that by the fourth generation of a Reform family, the kids intermarry? The real question is, why didn't they intermarry from the beginning? As soon as they said, we don't believe God gave the Torah, why didn't they drop it? And the answer is, psychologically speaking, because it's the nature of human beings that even when they change their belief systems, they desperately try with some superficial intellectual gymnastics to justify keeping their old identity. Again, like Immanuel Kant. He couldn't admit that, well, if there is no God, we're all part of the animal kingdom. No, we'll come up with something. 3 generations later, the Germans have no problem catching babies on their bayonets. And what happens is a clash between the intellect and the emotion. That when your intellect says, there is no point to what I used to think is important, but I am emotionally traumatized, so I come up with superficial nonsense. So I'm going to say God didn't give a Torah to the Jewish people. Some of them then just become Gentile or convert, not that they believe in Christianity, but why stick out like a sore thumb? But some of them create something called reform, where we are the goyim who made a mistake, but I just can't let go of it. I personally, because I'm supposed to interpret things in the best possible light, that tells me about what a Jewish neshama those people had, reform, conservative. If there is no God, or if he didn't give a Torah, then you should say, okay, let's dump it. No, the Jewish neshama couldn't let them do it. The problem is, I understand they meant well, but the road to hell is paved with good intentions. And therefore, once they tell their kids that, yeah, it's a bunch of guys made it up, all right, so that first generation feels very strongly Jewish, they're going to do. Second generation, a little less. Third, by the time you get to the third, fourth, or fifth generation, the kid comes and says, this is the most ridiculous thing I ever heard. I agree with him. That if being Jew is the mistakes of a bunch of Gentiles, for that purpose, I should say no to 99.7% of the girls I run into, because the difference between me and her is my ancestors were Gentiles who made a mistake, and hers were Gentiles who didn't make a mistake. What if she's willing to forgive me for my weird ancestors? And at that point, we'll just call it an even deal. Of course, it can't last more than, because Jews, if we're not smarter than Goyim, we're certainly not unbelievably dumber than them. And therefore, sooner or later, you can get to the point where the intellect is in place, the emotion is gone because he didn't know your booby, who you felt bad about without you realizing it. All that's left is the awareness of the meaningless of what we do to preserve the mistakes of our ancestors. And of course they intermarry. I almost think that the guy who comes to Aish Torah, who says, listen, if it's true, let me know. But if not, why shouldn't they intermarry? It's more clear. It's easier to talk to him. He has a clear intellect and not overburdened emotionally. His parents were more Torah connected as non-Orthodox Jews, but by their very element, they were emotionally traumatized about the fact that we may be right and they be wrong. The guy who's more likely to intermarry is also the guy who's more likely to come to Aish Torah. If it makes sense, let me hear it. If not, not. Because he's cleared the emotional baggage in which, if it's valuable, let me hear it. If not, not. But on that third level, what difference does God make to being a Jew? Is the essential definition of what it is to be a Jew. And if, I don't care if you call yourself conservative, reform, or secular, if you're saying, A, there is no God, or B, God did not transmit the information called Torah to the Jewish people, what you are saying is that the Jews are a group of Gentiles who made a mistake. Hey, clear it out. And if you don't, because of the emotional baggage, your children or grandchildren will, because sooner or later, all that's going to be left is the absurdity of how many of our ancestors' mistakes am I supposed to be preserved so that another group of goyim should shoot us, kill us, get rid of us, gas us? Do your kid a favor, young man. And I can understand why we're having a problem here in the state of Israel. You read Mr. Herzl's book called Alt Neuland. Mr. Herzl said, what it will be like 50 years after the creation of a Jewish state. Wow, wonderful, everybody, people get along, we have secure. You read the book, thank God, I think Zionism is lucky people don't read anymore. You read that book, and you realize that Mr. Herzl didn't have a clue about what the conflict between Jews and Gentiles really are about. Everything will be fine. Read it and understand he didn't have a clue. And I can understand the inner trauma where we think we're doing real well. But a lot of Israelis then say, you know what? We're still at the focus of an attempt to wipe us out, missile us, destroy us. And we have the nukes, tanks, planes, we have the economy, we have all that stuff. We don't have the reason. Perhaps only a minority have and think of, who am I? God, this is what God expects of me. And I'm going to have to go through it until the redemption. But to the guy who says, what redemption? There's no God. All that we need is... And as it becomes more and more obvious that it isn't going to work out in natural terms, that you have a political trauma in Israel where you have a right wing and left wing in which, frankly, nobody's even willing to say, look at our great leader, with him he'll solve the problem. We've gone beyond that. And when I was growing up, Begin, Sharon, hey, it's not there anymore. We're living in a country where nobody thinks there's anyone on his side who can solve it. All we know is that if the other side takes power or keeps in power, we're all finished. And when you have a situation that I have no solution, but they're deaf, and both sides thinking about the other, of course we're in a disastrous situation. And our enemies have very little accept the certainty that this is what God expects of them. So yeah, we're in big trouble. Not just in Chutz La'aretz in terms of intermarriage, but here. And with all due respect, I don't see myself as a liberal, but I understand the Arab position perfectly. We want control, and we know that as of perhaps Oslo, I don't know, different point, but at a certain point the Arabs say the Jews are not willing to suffer for the land. They said, they said, we're terrorists, we're terrible. Based on what those Jews believe, they're willing to trash what they used to say is true. There's no reason in the world for us to go for any deal, because if we can't do it now, we'll do it in 5 years, and if we can't do it in 5, we'll do it in 50 years. All we have to do is hold up. It's almost perhaps like what happened in the colonialist world, India, Africa, Southeast Asia. Most of the time, the natives were not powerful enough to beat the white invaders. All they had to do is say, you will have no peace until you leave. But where should we go? That's not their problem. But when I look at the Arab position, and people say, aren't they crazy? Don't they realize they can get a deal? They don't want a deal. They want to win. To me, it's perfectly sensible. But in terms of chutzlars, what difference does God make? If in fact you don't believe in God, or you don't believe God gave the Torah, you are saying the Jews are the Gentiles who made a mistake. Why do you want to keep on preserving that mistake? Any questions? Statements?
So tie it up. What difference does it make to you as a Jew if God gave the Torah or not?
As an individual, I can only get the most out of life if I know that's true and live accordingly. Humanity will only come to an agreed understanding of what is right and what is wrong if humanity as a whole comes to that understanding. And while I know that is ultimately the Messianic age, I can know that the process, which the rabbis point out, of the pagans becoming Christians, the pagans becoming Muslims, is part of the process of the fact that the more we do it right, the more humanity is changed. And the more we do it for the better, and the more we do it wrong, the more humanity is changed for the worse, because there is in the end one human soul in which the Jews are the heart. And what we do makes a difference. And what difference does it make to us surviving as Jewish people is to know that if the Jewish people are the people who have that information to how to create a true humanity, then there's nothing more valuable than for me to have it. And if not, it's a waste of time. Well, again, and like I said, the first couple generations, but it won't know. Sooner or later, your kids are going to be smart enough to realize, if it isn't so, why waste my energy?
You had to tie it to your beginning, though, meaning
That would be, I can repeat everything I said
Wait,
again, right? But
it doesn't matter if there's black holes or not. We don't care. Doesn't matter because it doesn't affect us.
right.
Now, we want to, if we believe or not, on an individual or on a corporate level, does it matter? What's the consequences?
Okay. And the question of pleasure, whether you're going to get that. In morality, what humanity understands to be right or wrong. In terms of the Jewish people, what is it being a Jew?
Well, that's fluid in itself of what it means to be a Jew, because if the times of the Beit HaMikdash, if they came to today to look and see what the Jews are today, they wouldn't even recognize us as being part of the same group, right?
No, not at all. Silly idea.
What?
They would look at the basic element of, take me to your leader. Even the Martians know how to do that. Your Torah is there. What determines, hey, what's that box over there that you don't turn on Shabbos? So they'd have to check the basic halacha that they had at that time and how it applies to this particular box. Yeah, Ruben.
Just a thought that you're asking, what can someone give to an infinite being? And you said nothing. But I would say that the one thing that God can not get from us is our, let's say, love for Him, or yirat shamayim, of our own free will. Because if He forces us to do that, we don't have the free will. If He doesn't, then there's no guarantee that He's going to give it.
And why does He need it?
To fulfill the purpose of the creation in the first place.
Love. So it gets right back to it. He knows, what can you do for God? Nothing. What can you do for God? Take advantage of the offer. Now, in a world where God is infinite love, then what God wants most is for you to take advantage of that ability to be as almost an equal to God. That God created a world where He offers a relationship and you respond. And the concept, therefore, of lishma, the highest level of a mitzvah is when I do it out of love of God and help, and then create a world where God depended on me to create that world. But the Gemara tells us, before you were born, you swore that you would come here and do mitzvahs on that level. Right? And basically, what are you talking about? Before you were born, you swore you'd be a tzaddik. You would do the mitzvahs to respond to God with love. In this world, if every tzaddik tells you that that's where you did it, you achieved it, assume they're wrong. Because there is nothing more destructive than thinking that that's why you're doing mitzvahs. So always keep in mind that that's your goal. Always, the Gemara says, even if every tzaddik in the world says, no, you did it, assume they're wrong. Nothing more dangerous to think that that's where you are. It's like it's like marriage. We don't get married. You didn't marry a girl because you love her. You married a person because you loved you. And when you came to the conclusion that that person would be great for you, your gal or your God, you say, whoa, what do I do to make a connection? If you do it right, you actually end up by giving in the relationship. You end up creating love by giving. It's the same thing with God. By God staying back and allowing you to make the decision to give, invest in the relationship, that creates a love of God. But the worst thing you could think is that you really got there. That if you're in a marriage and things are a little difficult, don't, after all that I've done for love. No, say, okay, let's see. After all, I got married because I knew it was good for me. All right, let's figure out how to make it better. And the Hollywood line made the things we do for love. But that'll explain the Hollywood divorce rate. Be a little more realistic. It gets back to what we said about unity. Or add to that, Mahatma Gandhi said every man has his own religion. Once we understand that every man, no matter how religious or how secular, has his own religion, you will find that he does his best to promote his religion. A secular person is as much likely to try to promote his religion as a member of ISIS promoting his. And the question is, how much power does he have to do it? There is no neutral ground to stand on. Everybody has his... When a person says, I don't believe in God, it should be more realistic. I do believe that there is no God. Okay, what evidence do you have? How do you stand behind it? What are the consequences? So I'm saying that there is an academia in Israel and a media who do represent a religion, but it's not Judaism. And the idea that there is neutral ground is always promoted by the state religions that actually rule and that may tolerate minorities, but that they determine the public space. So a religion called secularism is in control here. They may tolerate Judaism, but that is what the academia and the media are here. And when it seems that the minority, whether Muslim or Jewish, seems to be growing because they have more of a birth rate, then you shouldn't be surprised that the people who are in charge will be very nasty about the people who are attempting to take over. Nothing has changed. Every country is the same. The people in power will do what they have to maintain power in the face of a growing minority that may do things differently. That's where we are.
I have a question about the Messianic age, and you mentioned, and I think you quoted the Rambam, that both Christianity and Islam is part of God's plan to spread, we'll call it, morality or messianic concepts, one God. What will happen to those religions? People will just fade away. Like you mentioned, the prophecy of people come to the Jew and say, "I want to follow you. You have the truth."
Well,
How's that?
the Rambam used the description that they will, when Mashiach comes, they'll understand that they were right about A, B, and C, and they were wrong about X, Y, and Z. And they'll say, okay, on that which makes us different, we were mistaken, now let us go with you. It sounds very unlikely until you realize that if you were living in the Greco-Roman period, to believe that the Goyim would say, you know what, you're right, we shouldn't have gladiator fights, and we should know that there's one God, and we should get rid of our idols, and we should care about how we deal with other people. Yeah, that it was as absurd then as it would seem now.
Doesn't seem so absurd now. That so many, at least in the Christian world, are becoming more Zionistic and open to Hebraic roots. And I'm sure that even, I don't know, moderate Islam might be coming around as well. Is that possible?
Are you under 50? Yeah, under 50 is always more optimistic than those of us over 50. We give Americans extra years for under 50, even if they went over 50.
For the childish outlets?
So one of my favorite writers is George F. Will, syndicated columnist for the Washington Post Syndicate. Very good writer. He's a Gentile, right-wing, very pro-Israel. And I don't know if he quoted somebody or said it himself, but many years ago I learned this quote. George F. Will said, the advantage of being a pessimist is you are always either proven to be correct or pleasantly surprised.
And never disappointed.
Well, so money.
No, there's a.
There were two types of anti-Semites in Europe: Germans and Romanians. It's a type. There were more than just them. Germans were not capable of being bought. Romanians were anti-Semites, but you could buy them off. The Jews did much better in Romania than in Germany. Then when evil people take control, much better to have them sell out than to be so evil that they won't even sell out. So, good people should not sell out for money. But if you can have evil people, much better to have them take the money. What? Right. The Romanian Jewry was able to last in a way that Jewry ever, because the Romanians were anti-Semites, but they were able to be bought. I think it was, who was it? Richard Daley of Chicago, who when asked what's his definition of an honest politician, he says, once you buy him, he stays bought. All right, so